38 minutes. That's how long it took for one nation to completely destroy another. 500 people dead. A palace in ruins. A sultan fleeing for his life. All before most people finished their breakfast. This is the story of the war that redefined the word overkill. They called it the Spice Island. A paradise shimmering off the coast of East Africa, where the air was thick with the scent of cloves and the call to prayer drifted over turquoise seas. Zanzibar, small in size yet immense in influence. For centuries, it was the beating heart of trade in the Indian Ocean, ivory, gold, and tragically, human lives. Thousands of enslaved men and women passed through its markets, sold under the blazing sun to feed the wealth of sultans and merchants. It was a place where the boundaries between Africa, Arabia, and Europe blurred, a crossroads of ambition, empire, and exploitation. By the late 19th century, Zanzibar was no longer an independent kingdom. It had become a British protectorate, ruled by sultans but controlled by diplomats. The British claimed they were here to end the slave trade and bring order. But in truth, they were guarding the lifeblood of their empire, the sea routes to India. Yet even in the shadow of empire, the island had its own pulse. The Sultan's palace gleamed over the harbor, mosques called the faithful to prayer, and markets buzzed with life. But beneath that beauty, tensions simmered. Zanzibar's rulers were torn between two worlds, the traditions of their ancestors and the demands of their colonial masters. Everyone could sense that something was about to break. Because in 1896, a single death, the passing of one man, would ignite a crisis that revealed just how fragile imperial control really was. A war was coming. One that would last less than an hour. And yet, in those 38 minutes, an empire would show its true face. On the morning of August 25, 1896, Sultan Hamad bin Thuwaini, the British-approved ruler of Zanzibar, was found dead in his palace. The cause was never clear. Some whispered illness, others whispered poison. But one thing was certain, his death set off a political storm that would test the limits of empire itself. Under the Protectorate Agreement, no sultan could take the throne without British consent. It was imperial control disguised as partnership. The British expected the next ruler to be Hamad bin Muhammad, a man they trusted to obey orders. But before the British could act, Khalid bin Barhash, Hamad's ambitious cousin, made his move. With the help of loyal guards and palace troops, he seized the royal palace and declared himself sultan before sunset. Cannons were positioned. The royal band played. The red flag of Zanzibar fluttered proudly above the harbor. To the people, it looked like the birth of a new reign. To the British, it looked like rebellion. When the British consul, Basil Cave, learned of Khalid's takeover, he sent a message. "You are not to assume the throne without Her Majesty's consent." Khalid ignored it. He had the palace, the army, and the will to rule. That night, the British held an emergency meeting aboard their warships anchored in the harbor. Vice Admiral Harry Rawson, commander of the fleet, issued a chilling order: if Khalid refused to step down, they would remove him by force. At dawn, the ultimatum was delivered: leave the palace by 9 a.m. tomorrow. No negotiations. No compromise. Khalid's answer came in silence. He barricaded the palace, raised the Sultan's flag higher, and prepared for war. The clock had begun to tick. By dawn on August 27, 1896, the air over Zanzibar city was heavy with dread. The streets were silent. Shopkeepers had shuttered their stalls. From the harbor, 5 British warships, their iron hulls gleaming under the morning sun, loomed like predators waiting for the signal to strike. Inside the palace, Sultan Khalid bin Barhash stood defiant. Around him, nearly 3,000 men had gathered, palace guards, loyal civilians, and a handful of artillerymen. They had a few dozen old rifles and a small artillery battery guarding the shore. It was courage, not firepower, that held them together. Across the water, the British consul Basil Cave sent his final message. It was brief, cold, and precise. "If you do not haul down your flag and leave the palace by 9 a.m., we shall open fire." The ultimatum had a cruel efficiency. Britain, the most powerful empire on earth, giving one man less than an hour to decide between submission or destruction. As the minutes slipped away, British Marines took positions, their cannons aimed squarely at the palace. The sailors aboard HMS St. George, HMS Thrush, and HMS Sparrow stood ready. The range was so close that missing was impossible. In the palace courtyard, Khalid's supporters prayed. Some wept. Others swore oaths of loyalty to their sultan. The tension was unbearable. At 8:55 a.m., Cave sent one final warning. No reply came. At 9 a.m., still nothing. At 9:02 a.m., he turned to the admiral and nodded. Rawson gave the order. Open fire. And with that, the shortest war in history began, a clash not between equal armies, but between defiance and domination. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the first shell screamed through the air and slammed into the Sultan's palace. The walls, once symbols of royal authority, shattered instantly. Smoke and dust filled the sky as cannon after cannon fired in rapid succession. The thunder of British naval guns drowned out the cries of the city. Inside, chaos reigned. The defenders tried to fire back, but their antiquated artillery was no match. Within minutes, the Sultan's small fleet, including his pride, the HHS Glasgow, was reduced to flaming wreckage. The wooden ships burned so fast that sailors leapt into the harbor to escape the inferno. Khalid's men fought bravely, returning fire where they could, but the outcome was never in doubt. The British had warships armed with 9-pounder naval guns and Maxim machine guns, the pinnacle of industrial warfare. The palace, built for ceremony, not combat, was torn apart by relentless bombardment. By 9:31 a.m., just 29 minutes after the first shot, the Sultan's artillery fell silent. The palace was engulfed in flames. Hundreds lay dead or wounded. The red flag of Zanzibar, that symbol of sovereignty, still fluttered in the smoke, defiant but doomed. When it finally fell, it wasn't just a piece of cloth that dropped, it was an era. Khalid fled through a side gate, racing on foot to the German consulate, where he would beg for asylum. Behind him, his palace burned, his soldiers scattered, and his dream of independence reduced to ash. At 9:40 a.m., Vice Admiral Rawson signaled, "Cease fire." The war was over. 38 minutes. That's all it took for an empire to crush a kingdom, and rewrite the history of Zanzibar forever. By 9:45 a.m., the guns fell silent, but the silence was worse than the bombardment. Smoke rose from the palace ruins, carrying with it the ashes of Zanzibar's independence. The harbor was littered with debris and bodies. In just over half an hour, more than 500 Zanzibaris had been killed or wounded. On the British side, only one sailor was injured, a statistic that revealed the brutal imbalance of the so-called war. Sultan Khalid bin Barhash, once ruler of the Spice Island, now crouched inside the German consulate, trembling and exhausted. The Germans refused to hand him over, citing diplomatic immunity. Eventually, under the cover of night, they smuggled him out aboard a small boat to German East Africa, present-day Tanzania. He would live out his years in quiet exile, the man who lost a nation in 38 minutes. Meanwhile, the British wasted no time re-establishing control. By afternoon, Sultan Hamad bin Muhammad, their preferred candidate, was sworn in. The palace was a ruin, yet the Union Jack flew proudly once again over Zanzibar city. The message to the rest of Africa was unmistakable. Resistance would be met not with negotiation, but annihilation. The new Sultan became a loyal servant of the British Crown. Under his rule, the slave trade was officially abolished, a move celebrated by Britain as a moral victory, though many suspected it was simply another way to consolidate control. And for the people of Zanzibar, life went on, markets reopened, prayers resumed, and trade ships once again filled the harbor. But something had changed forever. In less than an hour, an empire had proven its power. And an island that once stood at the crossroads of worlds had become a footnote in someone else's history. The guns of Zanzibar fell silent, but the echo of that 38-minute war carried far beyond the Indian Ocean. It became a symbol, not of military glory, but of imperial arrogance. The British called it a Decisive action. In truth, it was an execution carried out with precision and pride. For Europe, the war was a brief headline. Newspapers mocked it as the shortest war in history. But behind the humor lay something darker, the idea that the lives of colonized people could be erased in less than an hour and forgotten by lunchtime. The lesson of Zanzibar wasn't about speed, it was about power. It showed how one empire, armed with modern industry and moral certainty, could crush centuries of culture in a single morning. It was a warning of what the 20th century would bring: the partition of Africa, the rise of colonial rule, and the slow, painful struggle for independence that would follow. As for Khalid bin Barhash, history nearly erased him. Yet his defiance, standing against the greatest empire on earth, even for just 38 minutes, became a quiet symbol of resistance. A reminder that even the smallest act of refusal carries weight. Today, the palace where the war began has been rebuilt. Tourists stroll past the harbor, where British shells once fell, unaware that beneath the calm water lie the ghosts of that morning. Zanzibar's streets hum again with life, but the memory lingers, if you listen closely enough. Empires fall, flags change, and time moves on. But in those 38 minutes, the world caught a glimpse of what empire really meant, and how fragile its power truly was. Because sometimes the shortest wars leave the longest shadows.